Hi, I'm Carol Jurgensen Sheets, aka Carol the Coach, and I wanted to talk to you both about conflict. Now, what I know to be true in my 40 years of clinical practice is that most people avoid conflict. And yet, what I teach people that in healthy relationships, conflict breeds intimacy, right? So the truth of the matter is, you're probably sitting there going, in healthy relationships, right? Well, if you are working on this relationship and he is in good recovery, or at least in recovery that is following the 10-step protocol for getting healthy, then you are working on becoming healthier. And when you're in a healthier relationship, you need to know conflict breeds intimacy. Now, what does that mean? I'm not talking sex. I'm talking that conflict breeds an exchange where there may be some storming, but after the storm, there is a closeness. You know, I always say that conflict is normal, natural, and necessary. And that addicts in really good recovery, you know, after 3 years, 5 years, 10, 15, they say that there were two things that absolutely catapulted their recovery relationally. The first one is that the partner had a bottom line. And by having a bottom line, that means that you decide what are your deal-breaking behaviors, what you're going to put up with, what are your boundaries, what are the consequences, and how you're going to handle things, how you're going to enforce your own sense of self-respect. Okay, so get that addicts say it really helped them in their recovery and their relational recovery to hear what you've thought. Okay, that's way different than that old model, you know, that co-addict model where he got to say, hey, stay on your side of the street. What I'm saying is he's saying, I want to know how she feels and I want to know what her bottom line is. Then the second thing that addicts say in good recovery that really helped them to stay true to their recovery and true to themselves and obviously true to the relationship is that they understood their wife's anger, that they heard it, that they understood it, and they respected it. There is no doubt that when you became betrayed, more than likely you would have bouts of anger. And sometimes that was rage, and sometimes that was a slow boil or a simmer. You know, I was talking to a partner today, and she said that when her husband was talking about the fact that so many of his friends in fellowship in the SAA program seemed to be giving up on their marriages, it was upsetting to him because he knew that they weren't getting good guidance. They didn't know how to become relational, so they were throwing up their hands. And so he's saying all these really wonderful things that most partners would love to hear. And yet it triggered his wife because his wife thought back to the past, and that is what her husband would do in his past. He'd bring up things he was doing. He'd blame it on his buddies. He'd act out, and he'd act all righteous. So she got, and she told me it wasn't really triggered. She got activated and just felt crummy for the rest of the day, felt fragile, felt not safe. Okay. But she didn't talk to him about it. There was no real conflict. The conflict was inside of her. And when partners talk about how they feel, the conflict is externalized and the addict knows where he stands. He may not like it. Here, this husband was doing a really good job of being different, having better values. He even went so far as to say that he had this conversation with God and said, God, how much should I talk to my buddies and encourage them to stick with it? Encourage them to go see Carol. Because I'm relational and I want couples to stay together if that's what they want. So he is the new and improved, but because he used that way back then to act out even further, she couldn't trust it. Okay, in healthy relationships, conflict breeds intimacy. And so we processed that. She talked about it. She shared her feelings, and he understood. And he didn't act defensively. Instead, what he did was he used AVR. Now, if you've been watching me, you know AVR is that empathy formula that I have in my book. You acknowledge the issue or the pain, you validate the feelings, and you reassure the partner. And so he did. He said, I can see why you got activated. I did do that before. That was me then. And that must really have brought up fear in you. Fear and maybe anger. And she shook her head yes. And then he said, but I want to reassure you that you have never seen me work harder, that I want this marriage to work, that I love you, and you can do anything. You can have me take a polygraph test. You can watch my walk and decide later on. So instead of getting defensive, he AVR'd her. He acknowledged, validated, and reassured her. And she said, this is the husband I really do want. This is the husband who's showing up and sitting with me in my pain. And again, if you've read my book, Help Her Heal, you know that I believe in the APSATS model. And that model says, if an addict gets into good recovery and he can sit with his spouse while she deals with the pain and agony of betrayal, she will ultimately get better and his self-esteem will rise too. And that's a win-win for everybody. But that starts with conflict. So, I'd like for you to get comfortable as a couple with conflict. And one of the ways you can do that is by understanding her pain. And one of the ways you can do that is by expressing your pain, your anger, your sadness to him. And then even if it looks bad, it looks like it's erupting into something more than it should, trust my motto. And my model and motto is, I know you probably could repeat it with me, in healthier relationships, conflict breeds intimacy. I'm Carol Jorgensen-Sheets, and they call me Carol the Coach. Thanks so much for finding out about conflict.